Some Q&A questions now.
Oh, makes you balance.
All right, at this time, we'd like to open for any questions for our speakers. If you have any questions, just go ahead.
My question is from Andrew. During your explanation of the management, you have shown a chart in which you have achieved the speed on the green, like from 1 year to another year. Would you share with us what all measures you took to achieve that speed of 11?
Yes, testing.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. So basically, the first year, we didn't know what we were trying to achieve. We just were getting some data together. Then we knew we wanted to increase the green speeds. So again, just doing everything earlier than we did the previous year, as far as mowing frequency, cutting the grass in the morning and the afternoon, reducing our nitrogen a little bit earlier, reducing the nitrogen earlier than the previous year, and maybe getting a little bit more aggressive with our plant growth regulators. Also, we were a little bit more, the last couple of years, we've been a little bit more aggressive with rolling the greens. We've started a little bit earlier as well, maybe 3 weeks out, even in the afternoons. It didn't have to be in the morning, but just getting the smoothest surface possible leading up to the tournament really makes the ball roll out a little bit more, and I think you can increase your green speeds like that. But again, just managing the growth rate of the grass. You can't expect to start the week of the tournament to do it. You got to think ahead. And every year, just working more and more on that. You don't want to, like Bill said this morning, you don't want to totally shut the grass down, but you want to have a good balance there where you're getting a little bit of growth, but it's so little that your green speeds are staying where they should throughout the week. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, next, please.
Andrew, do you need to check for the trueness and smoothness or not?
That's a good question. We did that in 2013. I think that's called the Greens Tester. Micah brought that. It's such a big tool that it's kind of hard to get on and off the airplane and through customs, so he stopped doing that. But yeah, we did do that. But yeah, that's more important than actual speed. But when you're stamping the greens, you can kind of tell what the ball's doing, if it's kind of wobbling around, if it's bumpy or whatnot. And I think all the frequent mowing, all the rolling, things like that, just to get the greens as smooth as possible, that's going to also it's going to speed up the greens as well, but you're also going to get better ball roll from those. But yeah, we did do that, and we actually got 10 out of 10 from the Greens Tester. And that's a good tool. I think it comes out of England or somewhere. And I got a good video of that as well. I should have brought that. But yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, quality of roll is more important than speed, if you really want to know the truth. But I think you can get both if you're prepared ahead of time.
All right, next, please. Anybody else with any questions? Micah's got a question.
I have a question for Dr. Kreuzer. For warm season, growth regulators. You showed some data from Bermuda. Can you speculate about paspalum or Zoysia japonica or Zoysia matrella? And also, as a follow-up to that, can you talk about the difference between ultra-dwarf Bermuda grass at green height and fairway height?
Yeah, I can, I can in the sense that we just don't have a lot of data and the warm seasons in general. Last year was the first year that we had really started building the models for the ultra-dwarf greens because we were having so many problems with diseases and a lot of growth suppression. So we took 2017 to start that research. And it's funny because as I was talking about it, you know, I'm always thinking about the weather variability that we have when, you know, we're in North America, and talking about growing degree day models and them being important, and then you guys here are so consistent in your temperatures that, you know, that maybe isn't as important, but we can still use those concepts to figure out what your ideal interval should be based on your climate norms, which is a little easier. Unfortunately, I have no idea what I would say for the Seashore and the Zoysia on greens. It's probably pretty similar, but I don't know what the growth rates look like. Do you have any idea on what kind of clipping yields or volumes you would get from, say, a Bermuda grass green to a Zoysia green? I mean, the data you presented would say that the clipping yields and clipping volumes are pretty similar to what we would expect to see on even bent grass greens in tournament conditions. So I would assume they'd be fairly similar, but I don't want to speculate too much, unfortunately. We do have, and the other thing too is on the Bermuda grasses, the common Bermuda grasses seem to have less growth suppression than some of the ultra dwarfs too. So there's definitely cultivar effects and species effects, and so we end up having lots of different models for all these different grass areas, and that's where we had to build this Greenkeeper app, because there's 20 or 30 different combinations of grasses and PGRs, and they all have their own different models, unfortunately. So it's a lot to keep track of, and the app really helps with that.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Maybe, yes.
Do you think, so if I'm managing Seashore paspalum or Zoysia, and you don't really want to speculate on the growing degree day intervals, do you think one can try to sort of figure out a tentative number by looking at the clipping volume?
I think if you're looking at clipping volume yourself, that you can start to figure that out. You can look at the trends, and we kind of saw that with, I did a quick example of the fairway collar decline situation. We know if our intervals are about right for all the PGRs on warm season grasses, we generally see between 50 and 60% clipping yield suppression. And you might think, okay, well, I need a control, I need an area that I'm not treating to measure that. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case. You could kind of see, looking at your absolute clipping volumes, are they continuing to decline over time? And if they are, then you're thinking maybe we're having an issue with over-applying those PGRs. And so you could probably get a rough number without actually having a true non-treated control plot. But ultimately, I think if we see the intensification, that might be one thing to say we're over-applying. If we're not maintaining the suppression, though, that's going to be more difficult to see. Although, again, with maybe the consistency in your climates, you're not going to have the variability and the spikes that we would see back in the States as the weather changes a lot more dramatically. So I think you could just kind of monitor clipping yields and start to make some assumptions about what seems reasonable. And we do find that 200 growing degree day interval for warm season grasses, even in our growth chambers for some of the common Bermudas, seems to be a pretty good starting place for a primo, I would say a 4 mill rate. So that would be kind of where I would start. Again, it's a base 10 Celsius on the warm season grasses, and then maybe look at your clipping volumes to help to dial that in.
So this is also for you, Bill.
This feels
No,
like
no surprise there. So can you speculate or talk a little bit about turfgrass growth in an environment in the monsoon season here? What happens when you have so much cloud cover, so much rain in a short span? how would you go about your fertilization scheme and your plant growth regulation scheme in that kind of scenario, where you still have the temperatures?
Yeah, I think, well, the temperatures are there, and if they're not changing too much all the time, I mean, that's kind of where we go to the analogy of, you know, you're in that gear, the grass has got the temperature that it's going to need. So the solar intensity and sunlight is so important to the warm season grasses that when you would have a real rainy stretch and you'd have a big reduction in sunlight and solar intensity, I would only have to imagine that that would have a real big impact on our clipping yields. And I mean, is that what you guys are seeing, right? If you have the rainy season, do you see a reduction in your clipping yields, or? Absolutely, yeah, okay. So in that situation too, even your fertility, your nitrogen fertilizer is going to be less responsive. So I gave the example of if you're fertilizing Bermuda grass and it's, you know, for some reason it'll be too cold, you wouldn't see the same fertilizer response. The same fertilizer responsiveness is going to be reduced when you have those really cold or really cloudy conditions, for two reasons. One, there's just that kind of growth potential of that grass based on the weather conditions it has, but then second, because of the solar energy that's required to convert the fertilizer into protein. It needs sun to happen. So if you have a lot of clouds, it's going to have a further dampening effect on the fertilizer. So if you're having that, I would, you know, bring the PGR rates back. I probably would still consider being on them, but maybe at a very low rate to get some kind of the plant health benefits. Some of the carbon partitioning is still good. Keep the sugar levels at a good level. But I wouldn't be trying to like nail them with fertilizer, because probably not going to see that much of a response out of it just because of the cloudiness and the bad weather conditions.
Next question, please.
Thank you. I want to ask the role of PGR on rooting or shooting system of grass. Do they suppress both simultaneously, or only a one system?
So the first part was about how do PGRs affect rooting, and it depends a little bit, but for the most part we don't see too much of a negative, and a lot of times not really a big positive impact on rooting from the PGRs. Some of it would show under periods of severe heat stress. You might see an increase in rooting in a hydroponic, like a fake situation, but when they're actually measuring roots in the field, then we're not seeing the response. So if you're not seeing those responses in the field, then, you know, trying to achieve them, even though you might see it in the artificial environment of a growth chamber or a greenhouse, you have to put some stock in that thing, and it's not going to have that big of an impact. So what we see is the sugar energy that would have went to increase growth rate in elongation starts to become rediverted to see an increase in tiller density. And so one of the reasons that we can get away with less nitrogen fertilizer, aside from us mowing it off, and so you need to replace where we're mowing, the second reason is because you see this increase in tiller density, and so you get these smaller, more compact leaves, actually a little bit wider most of the time too. The leaves actually widen out. Instead of just being long, they're a little bit more squatty. And so that's how the grass generally responds to those applications.
Next, please. Anybody else with questions? Go ahead.
There are two school of thought or methods, which are like when we do the coring. After the coring, there one group who says that leave it like this for at least 1 day, and then you do the top dressing after 1 day. And the other school of thought say that when you do the coring, immediately you do the top dressing. Now, one question is this, and the another is the, like before the tournament, is the cutting of the green and then rolling, or first roll the green and then do the cutting? No, I have two questions.
Okay. I don't have a good answer to either one of those questions. A lot of, you know, you could understand why maybe you'd want to to leave the holes open in the first one for maybe a gas exchange or an infiltration benefit to the soil. But putting a pure sand in there too is still going to have pretty good, it's going to have fine infiltration. I don't know, I've never actually looked at any research or thought about that. It's more about maybe someone saying that they've done either one of those things and it helped or it didn't hurt, but I don't have any kind of like empirical evidence to say that one is better than the other for both of those situations. I think whatever you think benefited your course better, or whatever the goals were that you had in trying to achieve the results you're trying to have, like that would make be a lot more important than me saying like you should do this or you shouldn't do that. It's probably something that it's not going to have a huge impact either way, but at least you'll have some kind of response based on what you need at your golf course. I think rolling before mowing, you definitely might be having more issues with, not really getting as clean of a cut. So that one is a little more clear cut. But then the same thing with the aeration. If you're making a hole and then you're top dressing the next day, is that hole closing? Are you getting sand in it all the way? I mean, there's some of those things, and it's really going to depend on the equipment and the holes you're trying to make, the sand source. Is it dry sand or is it wet sand? All those types of things. Right? Do you have any thoughts on that, Andrew?
I totally agree. If I'm aerifying, I don't really have a choice because we don't close the course that often. But regardless if you get it in that day or the day after, I'm more focused on getting the job accomplished. So who knows, it might rain the next day, it might rain the next week, and you can't get sand out there. And the holes close up and you can't get sand in them anymore. So I think you need to get it done as fast as possible, just because you never know what's going to happen after you've aerified. So I think just getting it in there as quickly as possible is what I would focus on. And I don't know the total science behind whether it's good to wait a day or not, but I wouldn't see it would be that big of a difference waiting. The rolling part, yeah, I can't imagine why I would want to roll before I mowed unless I aerified the greens and I wanted to smooth them out before I rolled them. I would do it in that case, maybe for a few days, just because I don't want to gouge the green because it's a little bumpy. But as for a tournament, no, I would roll after I mowed if I had to decide on one.
Next, please.
Got a question on, but I wanted to comment about the whole thing. I mean, in my experience, I'm with you. I like to fill up the holes as soon as possible and put as much sand in them as possible, because if you don't fill up the holes at all, let's just say they grow over from the surface, what do you got down there? You got a nice void, and what happens when, if you've seen, plant roots are going to just fill that hole up because they love the oxygen, so the plant roots are going to fill up that hole. So what you're actually getting in return is more organic buildup in your subsurface, which eventually will senesce and die, and then you'll have even more problems, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important when we're making any hole and filling it with sand is to make sure that sand stays continuous all the way up to the top.
Right.
There's too many times where people, you'll make a nice hole, you'll do something even really aggressive, like a drill and fill, and you have this really large hole that's really deep, and then we don't keep up with the sand top dressing, and now we sealed it off. And so there's times you'll cut a cup, and you'll see this channel of sand, and there'll be no roots in that. And you'll be like, look at this, I still have this great channel for water movement, but it's not the case anymore, because now you have this channel that's been sealed at the top by thatch. The water is going to stay out of that coarser material. And the reason there's not roots there is because there's not water there. There don't want to be roots there. So we need to make sure that we have continuous channels all the way up, so that when we have those big rainfall events, the water can then go into that channel and get down through that profile. So that's an important thing to remember.
Now my question, I just was curious. you mentioned you had some bad curvularia, and you treated it with a fungicide that works very well. What fungicide did you use?
Is that fairy ring or?
No, the curvularia.
Curvularia. Wow, there's not one particular fungicide that I've used that I'd say is the best. There's so many broad spectrum fungicides that will control it. Iprodione, and I could just go down the list. Yeah, there's not really one that I could just tell you, spray this and you'll control it.
Yeah, I thought you had a miracle cure.
No. But I think you have paspalum, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're in a different world than I am, I think. Zoysia grass is probably a little bit easier to manage the curvularia
I get some similar looking disease, and that's why I was curious.
Yeah.
You know, and I throw the book at it too. You know, and nothing eradicates it 100%, but a combination of things is usually works best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a plant pathologist in here, so maybe tomorrow he can, or Wednesday he can.
Well, I mean, if you're going curative, I always suggest, I actually don't have this in my presentation. Maybe I'm going to change things tonight. But particularly if you're going curative with anything that's foliar like that with curvularia, I would suggest mixing a contact along with a systemic so that you get a knockdown, a left and a right, so to speak. So chlorothalonil is a good contact, or mancozeb would be a good contact. And then along with something like a DMI, if you could get away with that, or more like a QOI, like an azoxystrobin to go along with it. Good.
All right. Next question, please.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Bill. Basically, the nitrogen cycle is quite complex. Like, for example, the existing and the conversion of the nitrogen in different forms. And maybe naturally, the nitrogen can be recycled 3 to 4 times or more during the growing season. So just now you have mentioned in one slide that we can get the nitrogen from the soil, plant tissue, and the fertilizer. So my question is, what is the effect of the fertilizer towards the nitrogen cycling? Thank you.
Yeah, so the question about nitrogen cycle, it is really complex, and I think one of the things that I just like to just remind a lot of our superintendents is that it's so complex, and we still don't really know a lot about the timing on when things are going to become available and how, and so we're kind of along for the ride. We can only do so much and then just hope that, you know, we're going to get a certain amount of mineralization. But we're still not to the point yet where we can look really definitively at how much organic matter is in our soil and know how much fertilizer we're going to get from that organic matter. And so it's an area of active research. And I think it's something that, you know, we were talking about at lunch, that clipping yield volumes actually can help us to estimate at least what we had received from the organic matter, from the soil breaking down. One of the slides I had showed a golf course that had removed about 2.4 pounds of nitrogen per thousand, but they only put down like 1.5 pounds. So that means that at least 0.9 pounds of nitrogen came from organic matter that season, and that would be reasonable for the climate that we have and for the age of those greens. But again, the timing is going to be the hard part. The other slide I had was at Whistling Straits, where they had the PGA Championship, and they may have gotten a pound of nitrogen that year, but a big chunk of it came after that dramatic change in the weather that they experienced. And again, it's maybe not as big of an issue in a climate like yours, where it's a lot more consistent than it is in the upper Midwest of the United States. But, you know, using clipping yield, you can at least start to look at what does your removal And then if your removal is in excess of how much your fertilizer you're applying, you can start to at least approximate how much you're getting from the organic matter from soil turnover. And then for future years, you can kind of look at that and say, you know, I'm accounting for maybe a pound or two from the soil. But yeah, it's definitely complex. Like you said, nitrogen can be cycling many times within a year or even over many years. So you can see a product like some of the organic fertilizers, Milorganite, for example. You know, that's got a 3-year mineralization cycle on it. So you put something like that down, you might be getting effects of that Milorganite not just months but years after you made an application of that. It's a sewage sludge type product. It's a compost from a refinery. So.
Next, please. Next questions. Guys, I urge you guys to ask questions. Our speakers here are very knowledgeable in their field. If you have any questions, please. They'll be able to give you pretty good answers today.
สำหรับคนไทยสามารถเขียนคำถามขึ้นมาบนเวทีได้เลยนะคะ เดี๋ยวเราจะถามให้นะคะ ถ้าไม่สะดวกจะถามเอง
And any other questions? I've got a question for Andrew. This goes out to some of the problems that Thai superintendents may have. When you first got to Kia and you start studying the course, drafting up your plans to improve and things like that, how did you convince your plan with the owners? Or were they very understanding and yeah, go ahead and let's do it?
That's a good question. I was fortunate that the owners recognized the problem, and I think that's the reason they asked me to come to Kia. So, and in Japan, I think everybody knows Japan's kind of secluded, and they don't dislike foreigners, but they don't like people from the outside coming in and just pointing their finger and saying do this. So it's kind of like a team effort when you go in there. But as far as the owners are concerned, they pretty much gave me free range to do what I needed to do, and as long as it wasn't, you know, obviously there were some cost issues that we couldn't do what we wanted to do, but we just worked with what we had. But yeah, I was just in a fortunate situation to where they recognized the problem and before I even got there, and that's why I was there. So I think in Japan it's more not the owners but getting the staff on the same mindset, kind of getting that they're it's just a job to most of them. So building up some pride in the golf course and in the team concept. I think played a key role into gradually getting things improved. But yeah, as far as owners were concerned, I didn't have that issue there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say one thing. I really thought it was cool how you took the job and you then went to the past golf video to figure out what were things that you observed there too, and just in documenting, we talked about documenting things with data, but documenting the progress you're making at golf courses. If you're going to try a new practice, thoroughly take videos and anything you can, and that before and after that practice, so that if you do have an owner that says, this is a pretty expensive cost or it's very disruptive, if you can have that to show that, let's look at the benefits that we had long-term as a result of it, or if we changed this practice, we went in and we did the irrigation head moving like you guys did, and look at how the fairways are so much better and consistent. I mean, that can really be helpful. So you're fortunate to have that TV there too, but even if you don't have TV, if you can just document before and after on those types of cultural practices, I think that can help give you some support.
Had a question up here?
Tell us about how to reduce thatch, especially in Bermuda, and tell us about some cultural practice to reduce thatch in Bermuda grass?
Can you say that one more time, please?
Thatch.
How do I remove thatch from Bermuda grass? I guess it really depends on where it's at. If it's in the fairways, the tees, or the greens. Obviously, the most efficient way is to verticut and get as much material out as possible. I don't know how deep it is. Sometimes you can't verticut that deep. Maybe, I don't like to aerate, but if you have a problem, then maybe you need to get aggressive with aerating until you get to a level that you want, and then maybe you can ride it out. If it's in the fairway or the tee, there's a piece of equipment called, is it the phrase mowing? Phrase mowing. It's a phrase mower, and it just takes off the top of the turf where all that buildup is, and then you kind of just grow it in again. I'm guessing. I've never done it, but that's another thing that you might want to look into if it's in the fairways or tees. But if it's in your greens, yeah, just getting aggressive. There are a lot of products on the market, I think, that say you can reduce your thatch by applying this product. I think it's some kind of microbes or whatever that break down everything. I would rather go the manual way and remove it, and then do some heavy top dressing maybe to get back to where you need to be. But yeah, that's what I would say do.
Do you have some recommendation about the depth of verticutting?
The depth of verticutting, that's again, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. It's hard to really go too deep because you're going to start ripping everything up. And then you got golfers coming in behind you. So it's maybe more frequent. Maybe go in the fairways, maybe 10 millimeters deep, and then do a good heavy top dressing. And then maybe when that recovers, maybe get on top of it again. Now, once you do that, it's going to be very tempting to go out there and fertilize a lot to get the recovery back. I don't like to do that because you're just creating more problems by over-fertilizing to get the grass to grow back. So be careful, I know, with your nutrient management and your fertilization, that you're not creating problems for yourself and you're moving towards your goal.
So, question for you. If you ever, now you're doing clipping yield collection, do you ever use that to figure out how much sand top dressing to apply or when to time cultivation based on, maybe a period where you had a lot of clipping yield or a period you had lower clipping yield, so maybe you top dress lower, more or less?
We haven't, we think there's a correlation there with the clipping yield and the frequency of top dressing and things like that, because obviously if the grass is growing, you're creating more organic matter. So if you're doing that, then yeah, you got to go out there and verticut or top dress more often. I think it's going to get there one day, and somebody might be looking at that presently. But I've decreased my top dressing. I top dressed twice last year on my greens, and it's really kind of unheard of. And that's not a year-round growing environment, but in Japan, normally I would have top dressed like 4 or 5 times. And I think it's really managing the growth rate. You almost like, okay, well, I don't need to top dress kind of situation. But we haven't gotten it to where, okay, because we've had this much clipping yield, we're going to top dress this much. We haven't gotten there yet.
Anybody else with a question? Go ahead, sir.
I have a question for Andrew. Actually, for our golf course, we are also using the Zoysia Machala on the fairways, tees, and rough. But one issue is we find that actually the Bermuda is more aggressive, much more aggressive than the Zoysia. So for your golf course, do you have any strategy to tackle this kind of issue?
No. But he's right. Actually, in Southeast Asia, I've heard that the zoysia grass can be more aggressive than the Bermuda grass. But in Japan, yeah, it just takes over a golf course. You can go to almost any golf course in Japan that is, 40 years or more old, and you will see contamination with Bermuda grass because it just takes over. And there are some chemicals out there, like, I can't think of the active ingredient, but it's like fusilade. Do you know the active ingredient? Fluazaflop. Active ingredient. It'll kind of, so the zoysia grass can take it, but it will kind of hurt the Bermuda grass a little bit. It'll come back. But if you stay on top of it, I think eventually it looks bad for a while because it's going to turn brown. But if you can get the Bermuda grass to grow into those areas after you've stunted the Bermuda grass, I think that's an option. I know in the States, it's the thing now to have zoysia grass fairways and Bermuda grass roughs. And I'm thinking, how in the world do you keep the Bermuda grass out of the fairways? And they do laps around the fairways with that fusilade, with the fusilade, and they do a pretty good job. It's pretty clean. But there are golf courses in Japan, if it's at a level to where you can go sod it out, they will spray Roundup in that area and go outside maybe, I guess, 10% of the area that they sprayed, and then dig it up like 15 centimeters deep, then come in, bring in some new soil, and resod it. There are many golf courses in Japan that do that. We're at the level to where it's almost 50-50, so we're kind of like throwing our hands up and just maintain what we have. So, yeah, it's a tough situation that a lot of golf courses in Japan actually have. That there's not really a good answer right now, I don't think.
Maybe I just follow up because actually we are using the fusilade already on the golf course, but so that's why I was just curious because like during the tournament you will back off the water, and then for the whole golf course, because this is something we face is like by the time we saw on the TV, actually the Bermuda, because it dry up faster than the soil. Actually, sometimes we will find the patches maybe show up on the TV or also. So do you think is there any other things can do like these cases to make at least the Bermuda less noticeable? Or
yeah, it's tough. Sometimes you just got to close your eyes and go with it. Yeah, we just keep it regulated so it's not growing any faster than the zoysia grass, but it reacts to the PGRs differently than the zoysia grass, so it might even look darker on TV or whatever. It really, some people are really concerned about it, and I've gotten to where I don't really care anymore. It's in the roughs, it's kind of an issue with our members and our outside play because it's hard to find your balls when the grass grows up. It causes an issue there, but the fairways are mowed at such a low height that it's not really a playability issue. It's more just visual. And if you can get past that, then it's, okay, whatever. It is what it is, and you just maintain what you got. As far as, drying up faster and things like that, I don't know, maybe you go spray wetting agent on those areas only, and so you get some water, you get consistent soil moisture in those areas. I don't know. It's a really good question that I'm sure lots of people will have problems with.
yeah, thank you.
In your golf course, just only 2 types of turf, right? But in Green Lake Chiang Mai,
Yes, so a lot of golf courses in Thailand, there's a whole
Many.
variety of weeds that we deal with. So if you guys have just 2, congratulations.
very hard to say.
Any questions so far from anybody else? Yes, in the back.
For the weeds, problem is a big issue in Thailand.
ขอถามคุณบิลนะครับอัตราการใช้พีโมความถี่ในการใช้จะมีผลกระทบต่อแร่ธาตุจุลินทรีย์ในดินหรือไม่ครับมีวิธีแก้ไหมครับ
He asks about the application rate of Primo Max that they use at the golf course. Is the effect for the effect to the organic matter, right? Effect to the
อัตราการใช้พีโมความถี่ในการใช้นะครับจะมีผลกระทบต่อแร่ธาตุจุลินทรีย์ในดินหรือไม่ครับ
Yeah, with the fertilizer. On the microbes or the minerals? So we've looked at applying the PGR with different levels of fertilizer, urea fertilizer, and we found that the intervals, again, weren't really affected by the nitrogen fertilizer rate, which would also mean that if we had a lot of mineralization, we wouldn't expect to see that much. Of course, there's always caveats to things, so I can say something like a broad statement like that, but if you have a lot of growth, then you are going to be mowing the product off a lot faster. But within the rates of growth that we normally would see at a particular area, we don't see that much of a change in how long it lasts. And so again, if we have a lot of fertilizer out there, it might be easier for us to kind of overwhelm the plant growth regulator. So again, thinking of that analogy of the brake versus the gas pedal, if you're seeing a mineralization flush, you're not going to see as big of a reduction in our clipping volumes as you would if there's less mineralization there. But it's not going to really change the intervals very much. And based on the consistencies of your climates too, the thing about that rate is really just kind of being how much suppression we're going to get. In terms of microbial, I don't know if I completely understood that question with the Primo. Would the Primo affect the microbes? It's hard to say what you mean by effect. There are some interesting microbes in the United States that Xanthomonas and Acidovorax are two bacteria that can produce this gibberellin, the hormone that the Primo actually inhibits. And it seems like if those bacteria are there and the conditions are favorable, sometimes if you put these PGRs down, we can see this etiolation where these bacteria can potentially make this hormone, and it gets into the plant, and then the plant grows and etiolates and has this really rapid growth rate. It's very light green color because it's growing so rapidly. And so we have seen that before. And it's potential that the PGRs are also impacting microbial communities, but we just don't really have a good understanding of what is in the current microbial community, which is in the microbiome. So if we don't even know what's there now, it's hard to really say how that community is going to be affected or changed as a result of those Primo applications, unfortunately.
So I guess what you're saying is if you actually study the microbes before you apply and then do another study on it, that could answer the question.
We would at least know a lot more if we looked at how that populations have changed. But right now, in the turf system in general, we just have very poor ideas of what is actually there from a full microbiome perspective, not just looking at certain types of bacteria, thinking about fungi and all the different biota that's in our soil. And so there's been some grants, I think. Are you on the grant with, so there's a couple of grants that have been submitted. I know Rock's got a grant. So a couple of grants have been submitted to start to understand what's actually there. But until we even know what's there, to figure out what a cultural practice or some inoculant or some fertilizer is going to do is going to be a problem. We're so far at the starting line that we can't even get to that point of how are we changing the microbes as a result of one practice or product.
Well, Bill, let me also say that, you know, this science to look at a whole microbial population of soil is expensive. You want to talk about a lot of money? When you're talking about individual, there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of different species within a soil. So teasing those apart is very difficult, and that's why we're on the cusp of getting to grants to do this. And just to put this in a bit of framework, just with our human being, while we're sitting here now, we have hundreds of thousands of microbes on us, and we're just now figuring those out, and they're above ground. So there's a lot of things that we need to learn about what we do and our management practices and our, particularly the chemicals that we put down, the fertilizers that we put down, and how they're impacting the microbes in the environment. So it's an exciting area of research, but we got a long way to go.
Okay, next question, please. Anybody else? There we go.
Can one reapply wetting agents based on a growing degree day interval?
We think so. I think it's going to be a little more complex than just the just using growing degree days. It may be soil temperature is probably a factor in there. I'm talking to some of the wetting agent chemists, and they talk about these products as really just being kind of complex sugars or fatty acids that microbes like to eat. So you would imagine if it's warmer outside, or the soils are warmer and there's proper moisture there, that if the activity of the microbe was at a greater level, that we'd see faster degradation. And so we have a student right now that's starting to do some of the modeling and some of the predictions of how long these wetting agents work. So I'm hopeful. I think other factors that are important would be kind of leaching fractions too. We're trying to also understand how quickly these products are binding to the soil and how quickly they're leaching out the bottom. So we would have to factor in some type of a rainfall event on top of that. So I think models are possible, and we're just kind of on the cusp of that right now. But when it comes to wetting agents, I really don't like the 4 to 6 week applications. I just feel like that stretches it out too long. On my personal experience with studying with these products, but also with working at golf courses, but we'd apply every 4 weeks, and you know, you get to week number 4, and we just would have not very good control at week 4. And that's why you're applying every 2 or 3 weeks. Same thing's very common in where I live. There's a lot of sandy soils, and the superintendents there, they're like, we can't get 4 weeks. We have to go 2 weeks so those sands can stay wet all the time. So I'm hopeful that in maybe 2 or 3 years we'll have a lot of good information and models for wetting agents. But we're just, again, starting that research now too.
Anyone else for the questions? Nope. Okay, then let's close the Q&A session. Thank you for the answers there. Okay.
Yeah, thank you guys. We appreciate it.
ครับทานข้าวที่ไหนล่ะครับเดี๋ยวสักครู่นะครับ หิวแล้วเหรอครับ
We wait a moment for set up the stage. The next session is field day and expositions previewed by AGAF.
Yes, I'd like to invite Eric representative of the AGIF.
And
For,
Richard Wong, please.
For your presentation,
PK.
please. All right, please give a warm welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I know you've had a long afternoon, so we're not going to take too much of your time, but we did want to give you a little bit more information about the Asia Gulf Industry Federation's education planning. And we'd like to introduce the certificate's easy for me to say, Certificate of Greenkeeping. You change your slide. The AGIF has been in existence for about 5 years, and one of the initial goals was to look for a certificate of education that was tailored to the Asia market. And we evaluated several different options, and I think today is a great event, and we've seen these kind of events over the years, but we don't have a consistent planned education certification program in Southeast Asia. So our goal long term was to see how we could make that happen. We did quite a few evaluations looking at who we could partner with, the GCSAA, AGCSA, various different companies and associations, and we eventually settled with the New Zealand Sports Turf Institute, who have a very, very good base of education programs that is a starting point. Okay. And so what we've come up with really is a program, and Eric will go through how it's actually going to work, but it is a certification that is sponsored by the industry, but it's not a commercial certificate. It'll actually be sponsored by AGIF and the RNA. The first course that we're going to be looking at is an assistance program. We went out to the market and we looked to see what level of education should we aim at. We looked at entry level, we looked at superintendent, and the feedback we got was to aim at people that work on a golf course, and in some cases have worked for many years on a golf course, but have not had a formal education. So ended at the 2IC or an experienced person on the golf course. The reason that we're able to go ahead is with a grant from the RNA, which we thank very much for their support, looking at way that they can put back into the industry in education. So really between the AGIF, which has about a membership of about 50 companies that get their livelihood from the golf industry, and you'll see there also there are 5 companies that have put up support, Jacobson, Textron, Jepson & Jessen, Syngenta, John Deere, and Toro. You won't see these logos on the certificate, which is next, but you will just see the RNA and the AGIF. But the industry is supporting, developing the program, and helping to run it. And I'll hand over to Eric, who'll talk a little bit more about the practicality.
Thank you, Richard. I'd also primarily like to thank the Thai Golf Course Superintendents Association, Kud Mesa, and the whole committee for partnering with us in many years, and we'd like to continue with that partnership on the field day tomorrow, but also this very important program. You can see the training materials, there was some evaluation whether we would go with online materials or paper-based materials. We felt that given that we're going to be dealing with several different languages and translation and online is a little bit difficult, that we would go paper-based, and this is a much more applicable way. Unfortunately, the New Zealand Sports Turf Institute has a lot of experience in generating the paper-based material, So that's fundamentally the way that we'll implement it. That's not to say that we won't have some online benefits as we are online training as we proceed with other partners and other development, but from the initial stage, it'll be a paper-based training program. Essentially, the topics, very generically introducing that we'll look at are the introductory turf science and management, operate golf course tools and equipment, operate golf course machinery, introductory irrigation management, maintain trees, shrubs, gardens, beds, and working as an effective team member on a golf course. So that's just the initial look. We'll be looking to do several levels and several disciplines as we go on. The basic implementation of training will be combination of face-to-face coursing with supervisors and technical support with the supervisors and learners. I think the key issue here is that from the initial phase, it will be some international facilitators from New Zealand, but over time it'll be more local experts, because local experts know the business. They'll be better in language translation and essentially a much better implementer of the program long term. The details, which we encourage you to ask us any questions while we're here at any time. We're looking at a maximum of 20 students per intake. Anything larger gets a little bit unwieldy. The cost for the level 1 certification would be $500 US, which we think is it's a very modest amount for this type of education. And we are looking to roll out in 2 markets. Thailand is a very robust market. We obviously have a good relationship with the Thai golf course superintendents. We're also looking to roll out in Malaysia for the first year, which should start, we hope, in mid-year. We're looking to roll out in 2019 in Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and Taiwan. We've had some interest from Hong Kong and Singapore as well, so it's not limited to those markets. It'll be a multi-year, multi-level, multi-discipline ongoing education, which means this is just the start. We're very excited to essentially be able to provide you all the most important assets of any golf course is the golf course itself. And to be able to provide you with a piece of paper documentation ongoing for your credibility to management in the marketplace is very exciting for us. So we look forward to working with you, and please come back with any questions that you might have to sign up. So thank you very much. If you have any questions right now, we'd be happy to entertain them.
I will just make one point. The materials there are in English. They will be in the local language, obviously, as we go through each country.
All right. All right, thank you. Any questions, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard and Eric again.
Okay, guys. We're about ready to wrap up the day today. Dinner tonight will be on the 2nd floor by the pool. It's
Shaba poolside.
Yeah, so if you guys exit out the back here, go down the elevator to the 2nd floor. Right outside is the pool area. That's where we'll host the dinner. Okay. Also, I'd like to announce the any participants that would like the payment receipts. They will be ready for you guys on Monday morning before our speaker. I'm sorry, Wednesday morning. Okay.
Now we have to recheck.
You have to recheck your names on the board just right outside. Please check your names. Make sure it's spelled correctly, and your names are on the list because they're going to print the receipts from those lists. Okay, so before you guys leave here, just go ahead and check the board. They should be ready right outside.
What time our dinner start?
6 p.m.
6 p.m.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. See you at a dinner.
Yes, have a good time at dinner.